Hey, this is Haley and welcome back to Bookshelf Bard. So this year I have read an extraordinary amount of young adult, which I don't normally delve that deeply into the genre. It's what's popular, and I saw the trailer for Shadow and Bone. It was released and it was actually a teaser trailer, but for how well it was done, it could have been the real trailer and I would have been fully satisfied. I think Netflix is going to create this series and put a ton of money into it, and so I'm excited to see what they're gonna do. As soon as I saw the trailer, I decided to go ahead and download the novels and see what they were all about. So Shadow and Bone follows the GrishaVerse, and they're written by Leigh Bardugo, this was my first time delving into her work. I really was not disappointed. It follows this GrishaVerse where you have normal people and then those who can influence the elements or the small science, and they are known as Grisha. She actually, in the first section of the book, does a very excellent job world building. So if you're starting out on the first book, Shadow and Bone, you really kind of have to get through some pretty heavy terms and world building at the beginning of the novel, and then you'll get deeper into the plot line and the story. You're in this country that is heading towards civil war. There's this portion of the country that's basically a chasm, and it's torn apart by the shadow fold or the unsea. In this pitch black shadow fold, these creatures who feast on human flesh live. So it's very difficult to get across for trade and commerce. You are initially introduced to two characters, Alina and Mal. Alina is a map maker within the army, and Mal is a scout or a tracker. They're best friends, and you can tell he's the love interest, but he hasn't really reciprocated that as of yet. And so on their first crossing of the unsea, they come across the Volcra, who of course try and attack the vessel that they're on. Suddenly, Alina has these powers of light that allow her to basically scare away the Volcra, which is a power that no one has seen yet. She ends up being taken back to the capital, Oz Alta, and it's the capital of Ravka, or Ravka. It's probably Ravka. Then she's introduced to the Darkling, which she has heard about the Darkling, but she has never met him before. He's a very powerful general of the Grisha, and he basically takes her under his wing in order to finer tune her capabilities and her powers. You can see how they're setting up protagonist and antagonist, and I'm not really going to give you too many spoilers, but I mean, his name is the Darkling, so you kind of already know he's going to be the antagonist. I mean, I don't really think telling you the Darkling is the bad guy is really too much of a spoiler. In order to help defeat the Darkling, who really wants to use Alina's powers to his own devices, she ends up searching out these 3 amplifiers, and these amplifiers will allow her to increase her powers enough to take on this 1,000-year-old being, the Darkling. And she's just a teenager, so you can see how this is the typical YA trope. Oh, I'm like a teenager with new powers and I'm gonna defeat this 1,000-year-old bad guy. So I really like the story, but it wasn't anything new. Like, I feel like I've had this trope, I've had this storyline so many times. With it being as unoriginal as it was, like, I still enjoyed it. So I think that says something to Leigh Bardugo's storytelling and her writing style. She actually did a really good job. My favorite character was not Alina, was not Mal, was really not the Darkling. It was Prince Nikolai, and I read the other 2 novels in the series, Siege and Storm, Ruin and Rising, all for his character. He is hands down the wittiest, the most sarcastic, and the smartest character of them all. I was totally Team Nikolai. Forget about Team Mal, Team Darkling. I really did not like them as love interests in the book because Mal was this super hardcore wet blanket that I felt Alina didn't deserve. He didn't even show her attention until she was the object of everybody else's attention, and then he decided he liked her. As for the Darkling, like, yeah, you can tell he's this dark, mysterious, morally gray character, and that appeals to a lot of readers, but like, he's this 1,000-year-old creepy guy that is just using Alina to his devices. Like, low-key, he had the best plans for the country out of anybody. Like, if they would have just sat back and let him create a safe place for the Grisha, like, it all would, I think, would have gone fine. I mean, he definitely went down a path of violence and destruction that was not okay, but like everybody started resisting him, and all he wanted to do was create a safe place for the Grisha. And the Grisha had been basically without trial, I mean, like, put on the pyre, burned for witchcraft. They were experimented on and basically always end up being murdered at the end or sold as indentured slaves. His vision for Ravka was a place where Grisha could come and train and be safe. But he went down a dark path of violence, and then when his violence turned on the Grisha themselves, like, yeah, like, he just kind of negated his whole worldview. I did enjoy the storyline, and of course she's searching for the 3 amplifiers to defeat the Darkling. And so that's why you have the original trilogy, Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising. So it was a really good set of books, but it was kind of unoriginal in the fact that it is a young teenager who has to defeat this 1,000-year-old villain with newfound powers. So it wasn't anything that I hadn't seen before. So because I love the character of Prince Nikolai so much within the first trilogy, I kind of skipped the next duology, which they're supposed to go in a timeline. So I do not recommend doing this, but I did skip over to King of Scars. I don't recommend skipping over this next duology because it was hands down my favorite. Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom follow a different country in this whole universe, this GrishaVerse that Leigh Bardugo created. It follows these criminal masterminds. Your leader is Kaz Brecker and his crew, and every character was so vividly created. They're basically hired by this individual who wants them to rescue an inventor in another part of the country, and this inventor has created a new drug called Jurda Parem. And Jurda Parem enhances Grisha capabilities far beyond what they need to be or what they ever should be. And so it's nothing the country's ever seen before. They want the creator rescued so that no other country can use him as a weapon and can use the Grisha as a weapon under the influence of this Jurda Parem. It's a heist fantasy, and it is so well done. You can really tell that Leigh Bardugo's writing has just, I mean, like, rapidly just expanded in creativity and refinement. The ideas and the heist and the mystery and, oh, just the unraveling of the whole adventure. And I also love that throughout these 2 novels, most of the characters like flip back and forth between point of view. That's something that I absolutely love in novels because I think it speaks to the author's abilities whenever they're able to so thoroughly and so well take on that character's persona in a chapter that you can flip back and forth and you really don't even need to see who's speaking above the chapter title because she has created their personality and fleshed them out so thoroughly. So Leigh Bardugo's skills, like, enhanced over 9,000 when she got to these 2 books. They were so good. They hands down were my favorite of all of the GrishaVerse trilogy and all the GrishaVerse novels. The quality was just so much better and the storyline was just so beautifully convoluted and it was so good. The action, it was fantastic. I loved it. Kaz was fantastic. Inej was beautiful and wonderful, and that's one thing I do love about these 2 novels. It handles the trauma of the characters so delicately but very respectfully and tastefully, and there are a few trigger warnings. Like, it does deal with human trafficking. It deals with, I mean, very gently sexual assault, and it doesn't really go into any detail or anything like that. You just know that the characters have had some sort of trauma in their background, in their backstory. And so I do love that she didn't try to capitalize off of this horrendous trauma. She just mentioned it and you watch the characters heal and deal with what they were going through. And out of these 2, like, Six of Crows definitely introduces you to the characters and you love them, but Crooked Kingdom, out of the duology, out of the GrishaVerse, this was the one that made me cry. Because I had read them a little bit out of order, reading King of Scars before this duology, I knew what was gonna happen. It still didn't really ruin it for me. The relationships were beautiful. I loved all the characters and how they fit together and they worked in their own niche within the group. Like, I want to reread it, or it's one of those books that you would give your soul to reread again, just to re-experience it and to love the characters from the start all over again. She did such a good job with these 2 books, and it follows a couple years after the Civil War in Ravka. Honestly, like, You don't even really need to read the original trilogy to fit into these two books or to know what's going on. Like, it helps because the original trilogy really does set up the world, and it sets up your knowledge of the Grisha and then the royalty and politics that were going on in Ravka at the time. But this takes place in a whole different section of the world and a whole different set of characters. If you're going to read the trilogy and you're set on continuing to these two books, like, yeah, that's a great timeline. But if the first three books are going to kind of wear down your desire to read the next duology, I would just skip straight ahead and go to Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, because they were fantastic. It was one of my favorite books of all time now. The last one in the GrishaVerse that I ended up reading, and then that is currently available because the second in this duology is releasing March 30th. It is King of Scars. And once again, you're following King Nikolai and Zoya, and then also Nina, who you're introduced to in Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. You love the characters all over again. She did such a good job fleshing out Zoya even further, and of course she provided a tragic backstory to make you fall in love with her, because in the first trilogy, I did not like Zoya. I thought she was Alina's competition in happily ending up her romance, and so I didn't like Zoya at all, because she was just this beautiful, cocky squalor. Then, of course, Leigh Bardugo had to go and make this tragic backstory and humanize her, and then you fall in love with her. I do love that Leigh Bardugo doesn't like soften Zoya's sharp edges. She keeps her this fierce warrior female, and she doesn't make her less sarcastic or less snarky. She keeps her just who she is. So I like that she didn't change her to make her more lovable or soften her. And you fall in love with her, but for Zoya as Zoya and not for anybody else. And then of course, Prince Nikolai was the best all throughout the series. In this novel, you're following his journey because after the Darkling, he was left with some remnant of his power within Nikolai, within himself. And so they're trying to find some way to basically take that out. It's growing day by day. He has to overcome this power, and he wants it to be rid of it. They're on this journey. They've had these weird happenings around the country, and so they're traveling to these almost holy sites to try to find some type of cure, some type of ritual to rid Nikolai of this power. It kind of gave me this weird, almost like Chronicles of Narnia vibe, because you start to meet these old and ancient powers, and for some reason it kind of gave me The Magician's Nephew with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe kind of smushed together, just because of how the ancient powerful beings were fleshed out. It definitely wasn't as good as Six of Crows or Crooked Kingdom. If you read this book, the ending is a huge twist. A huge character ends up coming back into the books. I'm really excited to see what she's gonna do for Rule of Wolves that's released on March 30th. I'm so excited. I have it on pre-order and I can't wait. She's already set up the storyline so well. Her writing has just vastly improved. And this book better be as good as I hope it is. The characters in the source material that she now has to work with, oh, I think it's going to be fantastic. So I'm excited to see if even more characters are going to come back into the storyline at the end, and who's going to make guest appearances, because in Crooked Kingdom, Prince Nikolai kind of made a guest appearance, and so I'm wondering if she's going to do the same thing with some of the Six of Crows group in Rule of Wolves. I'm really glad that I ended up delving into this GrishaVerse, just because you could see like her capabilities just greatly improved throughout the series. It was a beautiful world building. It's very Russian inspired, and I think that she actually ended up working with the linguist or the language creator who helped with Game of Thrones. It's a solid fantasy novel. I think they're going to do a fantastic job, hopefully, with the Netflix series. I really hope it doesn't just ruin the novels that I've read so far, but I think they've chosen a diverse and beautiful group of actors to play out these roles. Most of the characters and the actors so far, I've been actually pretty happy with the casting choices. So I'm really excited to see what they're going to do. I can't believe I have a whole month to wait, but I only have a few days left to wait until Rule of Wolves. If you pick up any of these books, definitely pick up Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. They're fantastic. They're one of the best and the smartest plot lines I've seen in young adult. They're so well done, and hope you enjoy the series if you don't end up reading the books. But thank you so much for tuning in.